So back to reading Eudora Welty, A Worn Path. So yeah, this is a good chance to talk about kind of women's suffrage, women's rights, and why the military-industrial complex continues to consume time, energy, and human resources. A good model is Google, where they hired too much and had a monopoly or a big company, and similarly there's sequestration going on in, um, you know, from a broader extent, um, in the American Army. And the American Army is solely males, right? There's generally no women on the battlefield. Um, and so when there's massive troop troop withdrawals, then we have to think about what that means. There's withdrawal, right, from war, and that's because you know, in society today, in America, a lot of men, which is a continued thing that I learn about in AA, like myself, I'm single, I'm chaste. Um, and so what I'm learning is that if you don't understand, like what Bill Clinton said, sexual relations in America, then you miss a lot of metaphorical reason. You can't it's hard to talk to women. You know, one thing is generally a stereotype is a man is considered handsome and a woman is considered beautiful. So beauty is something you need to observe, but you need to interact with in order to understand it. So, I recommend, to myself, that my sense of selfishness, that instead of self pity and um, continued behavior and persecuting women, I could try to interact with women in the social sphere, call my mom more, things like that. I do have a mother and a sister, so I have an advantage there. Um, so that's an example of a breakthrough that you have in therapy that I'm lucky to have um, two women. And then now I have a niece, so we'll continue. Ghost, she said sharply. Who be you the ghost of? For I have heard of nary death close by. But there was no answer, only the ragged dancing in the wind. She shut her eyes, reached out her hand, and touched asleep. So that was what we had commented on. She stood straight and faced him. Doesn't the gun scare you? He said, still pointing at it. No, sir. I seen plenty go off closer by in my day, and for less than what I've done, she said, holding utterly still. He smiled and shouldered the gun. Well, Granny, he said, you must be 100 years old and scared of nothing. I'd give you a dime if I had any money with me, but you take my advice and stay home, and nothing will happen to you. I bound to go on my way, mister, said Phoenix. She inclined her head in the red rag that they went in a different direction, but she could hear the gun shooting again and again over the hill. She walked on. The shadows hung from the oak trees to the road like curtains. Then she smelled wood smoke and smelled the river, and she saw a steeple and the cabins on their steep steps. The reason comics are so important is like curtains, there's window, the window is important in Matthew, um, and then art is important in like fine art. Comics are sketches, right? Like sketch comedy with Dana Carvey and stuff like that, Tina Fey. Um, so I just think comics are neat. And, you know, at Cooley, we say we're willing to pivot, but, you know, it seems like the School of Visual Arts, one thing that like Wikipedia, YouTube, Khan Academy, all these different platforms have is that you could kind of easily have a comic. If you were to think about the headline, the homepage, right? It's kind of a comic. So when you think about storyboarding, like for The West Wing or something, that's essentially in comic form. Um, Dozens of little black children whirled around her. There ahead was Natchez shining. Bells were ringing. She watched on. Natchez Trace is kind of a common theme in the South, I think. Um, in the paved city, It was Christmas time. There were red green electric lights strung and crisscrossed everywhere, and all turned out in the daytime. Old Phoenix would have been lost if she had not distrusted her eyesight and depended on her feet to know where to take her. She paused quietly on the sidewalk where people were passing by. A lady came along in the crowd carrying an armful of red, green, and silver wrapped presents. She gave off perfume like the red roses in hot summer, and Phoenix stopped her. Please, Missy, will you lace up my shoe? She held up her foot. What do you want, Grandma? So, one common theme is in the workplace, do you want a guy or a girl as a boss? Right? Is boss an appropriate word? I guess we should say supervisor or manager. And I've made clear I generally want women. I've had women managers at cars. It was a female manager. Also at Dentsu, where I had a lot of success, even in a tough environment. Um, and that's because um, the general Oedipus complex that's in Hamlet is you want to kill your father and marry your mother, whereas guys act like they're disinterested but tend to be greedy and jealous, and also actually steal ideas and money, because they're more violent. That could be a stereotype, but when you think about news, like if you look at the news, there's no Department of Female Sexuality that's at the headline. Every headline is the Department of War, even if you're not in it. What do you want, Grandma? See my shoe, said Phoenix. So we have an implicit bias that war is a good metaphorical reason when it's obviously not. For instance, Jesus Christ was chaste, right? But it's well known he had a good relationship with his mother. you know, Martha Washington and George Washington had a good relationship. Um, Thomas Jefferson and his sister, Eudora Welty, had a good relationship. It goes on and on like that, where Friedrich Nietzsche, um, if he were Joseph Goebbels, he had a great, the downside of that is they didn't like women that much, right? So he had a good relationship with who? With Adolf Hitler. So, people like Devin and people like Urshel Walker and people like Ben, they represent that gay stereotype, and that's where that kind of neurosis stems from. So it's more on us to say they're not the boss, right? Do all right for out in the country, but wouldn't look to right in a big building. So still Chrysler Tower, said the lady. She put her packages down on the sidewalk. Sometimes we use emphasis and we expect the other person to know, and instead it's translated as passive aggressive or brutal. Beside her, and laced and tied both shoes tightly. Can't lace them with a cane, said Phoenix. Thank you, Missy. I don't mind asking a nice lady to tie up my shoe when I gets out on the street. Moving slowly and from side to side, she went into the big building. For instance, like, one of my friends from Emory, I believe, was Ezra Klein. So, you know, that's tough. And into a tower of steps where she walked up and around until her feet knew to stop. And this is probably how moms read to children. They read and then they tell them facts. She entered a door, and there she saw, nailed up on the wall, the document that had been stamped with the gold seal and framed in the gold frame, which matched the dream that was hung up in her head. Here I be, she said. There was a fixed and ceremonial stiffness over her body. A charity case, I suppose, said an attendant who sat at the desk before her. But people only looked above her head. There was a sweat on her face. The wrinkles in her skin shone like a bright net. Speak up, Grandma, the woman said. What's your name? We must have your history. Have you been here before? What seems to be the trouble with you? Old Phoenix only gave a twitch to her face as if a fly were bothering her. Are you deaf? Cried the attendant. But then the nurse came in. Oh, that's just old Aunt Phoenix, she said. She doesn't come for herself. She has a little grandson. She has these trips just as regular as clockwork. She lives away back off the old Natchez Trace. She bent down. Well, Aunt Phoenix, why don't you just take a seat? Why won't you keep standing after your long trip? She pointed. The old woman sat down, bolt upright, in the seat. Now, how old is the boy? Asked the nurse. Old Phoenix did not speak. I said, how old is the boy? But Phoenix only waited and stared straight ahead, her face very solemn and withdrawn into rigidity. Is his throat any better? Asked the nurse. Aunt Phoenix, don't you hear me? Is your grandson's throat any better since the last time you came for the medicine? With her hands on her knees, the old woman waited, silent, erect, and motionless, just as if she were in the armor. You mustn't take up your time this way. Aunt Phoenix, the nurse said. Tell us quickly about your grandson and get it over. He isn't dead, is he? At last there came a flicker, and then a flame of comprehension across her face, and she spake. My grandson, it was my memory, had left me. There I sat and forgot why I made my long trip. Forget, the nurse frowned, after you came so far? So when you read, you have to have an inert force that, because there's going to be passages you don't like or don't understand. So one idea is to use world events which register in your head to kind of, if every action has an equal and opposite reaction, you would use that force to understand why the opposite could happen. It was like an old woman begging a dignified forgiveness for waking up frightened in the night. I never did go to school. I was too old at the surrender, she said in a soft voice. I'm an old woman without an education. It was my memory. It was my memory. Fail me. My little grandson. He is just the same, and I forgot it in the coming. Throat never heals, does it? Said the nurse, speaking in a loud, sure voice to old Phoenix. By now she had a card with something written on it, a little list. Yes, swallowed lie. When was it? January 2, 3 years ago. Phoenix spoke unasked. Now, missy, he not dead, he just the same. Every little while his throat began to close up again, and he not able to swallow, he not get his breath, he not able to help himself. So the time come around, and I go on another trip for the soothing medicine. All right, the doctor said, as long as you came to it, you could have it, said the nurse. But it's an obstinate, which means stubborn case. My little grandson, he sit up there in the house all wrapped up, waiting by himself. Phoenix went on. We is the only two left in the world. He suffer and don't seem to put him back at all. When do we use accents? Who knows? He wear a little patch, quilt, and keep. I have no idea what this is about anymore. Holding his mouth open like a little bird. It's incredibly experimental, said the author herself. An Enduring Chill is a wonderful book by Flannery O'Connor. And there it is. All right. The nurse was trying to hush her now. She brought her book bottle of medicine. Charity, she said, making a check mark in a book. Old Phoenix held the book close to her eyes and then carefully put it out of her socket. I thank you, she said. It's Christmas time, Grandma. Could I give you a free pennies out of the purse? 5 pennies is a nickel, said Phoenix stiffly. She uses, the word erection a lot, allusions to erection. So, like, um, erections, like, is like the word, what's it called? In the Bible, it's called circumcision. Um, so those are things that are you have to use metaphors to get around, or context or syntax, um, indicating it's a tough read. Um, when you sing it, it's even tougher. The other thing, though, is you're guaranteed privacy if you kind of psychoanalyze it. Phoenix rose carefully and held out her hand. She received the nickel and then fished the other nickel out of her pocket and laid it beside the new one, unless, with her head on one side. Then she gave a tap with her cane on the floor. This is what come to me to do. So I guess Herman Cain, the mutiny, is plagiarized off of this. I going to the store and buy my child a little windmill they sells made out of paper. Then again, it's the experience and what you're doing. I'm laughing like a monkey. I'll march myself back where he is waiting, holding it straight up in his hand. She lifted her free hand, gave a little nod, turned around, and walked out of the doctor's office. Then her slow step began on the stairs going down. So it's an incomplete story, but the beginning is amazing. Then it's important to finish it. But um, yeah, what's a nod, right? So a Homeric nod comes, I think, from John, which is just a nod of understanding. It's kind of like a wink. Um, it's metaphorical, but it's really allegorical for um, it's for where you are in your life and kind of the things you want to do in the future and your understanding of the past. Um, so you can think of it as in athletics, but um, I guess the idea is actually like when you lean your elbows up in a shower and hold over a tile and there's a window that looks out and you kind of like nod in the shower. That's kind of like the representation I got from John. Thank you.